The last rays of sunlight faded behind St. Michael's Cathedral, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets of old Vienna. Inside the dimly lit Café Mozart, Sarah Bennett methodically polished the antique silver coffee pots, each movement precise and deliberate, her weathered hands, marked with calluses that most would attribute to years of hospitality work, moved with an efficiency that spoke of a different kind of training altogether. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The historic café, with its vaulted ceilings and ornate mirrors, had stood as a testament to Vienna's cultural heritage for over 2 centuries. Its marble-topped tables had hosted composers, revolutionaries, and spies, though few of its current patrons knew the full extent of that particular history. Sarah had chosen this position carefully, appreciating how the café's architectural quirks provided excellent sightlines to all entry points, while its reputation as a tourist destination offered perfect cover for watching the city's shifting undercurrents. At precisely 8:47 p.m., the brass bell above the door chimed. Through the antique mirror's reflection, Sarah observed 3 men enter, their designer suits failing to conceal the predatory grace of their movements. She recognized Anton Kovac immediately. His reputation in Vienna's underground art world preceded him. The businessman had built an empire acquiring lost artifacts for wealthy collectors, though his methods of acquisition had grown increasingly aggressive over the past year. Kovac's companion, a tall man with aristocratic features and a slight limp, was Nikolai Volkov, whose family connections to Russian oligarchs made him practically untouchable in certain circles. The third man was new, young, nervous, and trying too hard to project confidence. Sarah catalogued his details with the same precision she'd once used to document environmental conditions in far more hostile territories. Right-handed, new shoes, with pristine soles, tension in his shoulder, suggesting a concealed weapon he wasn't yet comfortable carrying. "Good evening, gentlemen," called Heinrich from behind the centuries-old coffee bar, his grandfatherly demeanor masking decades of experience reading the moods of Vienna's elite. He had given Sarah the job 3 years ago, recognizing something in her bearing that spoke of someone who understood the value of patience and precision. The men settled into the corner booth, the one Sarah knew they would choose, as it offered the best view of both the main entrance and the kitchen access. It was the same spot she would have selected, though for entirely different reasons. Kovac sprawled with calculated casualness, while Volkov maintained perfect posture, his manicured hands arranged precisely on the marble tabletop. Sarah continued, her closing routine, her movements deliberately understated. To anyone watching, she appeared to be nothing more than another service worker going through familiar motions. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, reading glasses perched on her nose, completing the picture of unremarkable efficiency. What Kovac's group couldn't see was how those same hands had once assembled specialized equipment in complete darkness during operations that remained classified. They didn't notice how her practiced gaze tracked their reflections in the cafe's gilded mirrors, or how her sensible shoes were actually custom-made for silent movement across any surface. "Coffee, gentlemen?" she asked, approaching their table. With professional detachment, her voice carried just the right amount of accented English, another skill honed through years of becoming whatever each situation required. Heinrich watched through the coffee bar's brass-framed service window, his hand resting near the silent alarm he'd installed beneath the counter. The old man had survived the Cold War by knowing when trouble walked through his door, but he'd never seen this particular brand of danger before, the kind that wore bespoke suits and smiled while discussing the acquisition of priceless artifacts. Through any means necessary, the cafe's apparent vulnerability had drawn Kovac's organization like moths to flame. They had been systematically working their way through Vienna's historic district, pressuring established businesses to facilitate their operations. Those who refused found themselves dealing with tragic accidents or mysterious health code violations. 3 family-owned establishments had already closed in the past month alone. But they had no way of knowing that this seemingly easy target had been chosen by someone who understood their methods on a level they couldn't comprehend. Sarah Bennett hadn't just worked in artifact recovery. She had been a legend in circles that didn't officially exist. Her codename Curator wasn't earned from preserving art, but from how often she had recovered stolen cultural treasures without leaving any trace of her involvement. The brass bell chimed again as a late-night tourist. Couple entered, nodding to Heinrich before taking a seat near the window. Sarah noted their position automatically, categorizing them as neutral factors in the tactical situation that was rapidly developing. Outside, horse-drawn carriages still clattered past, their sounds mixing with the evening church bells in a symphony that had remained unchanged for centuries. Sarah's journey to this moment had begun decades earlier, though the patrons of Café Mozart would never guess that the quiet woman who served their coffee had once been responsible for recovering some of the world's most significant lost artifacts. Her training hadn't just covered combat and recovery operations. It had included art history, cultural preservation, and the ability to spot forgeries that could fool even expert authenticators. The medieval church across the street began tolling. The hour, its deep bells resonating through the cafe's ancient walls. Sarah moved between tables with practiced ease, each step carefully chosen to maintain optimal position relative to Kovac's group while appearing completely natural. The skills that had once protected priceless artifacts in war zones had been adapted to serve coffee in one of Vienna's oldest establishments. Though the core principles remained the same: observe, analyze, and always be prepared for the unexpected. Inside the cafe's small office, young Sophie Weber was cataloguing the day's receipts. The 19-year-old art history student had been working at Café Mozart since her father's gallery had mysteriously lost its insurance coverage 3 months ago. What she didn't know was that Sarah had specifically requested her hire, recognizing both her potential and her connection to Vienna's legitimate art world. The cafe's apparent vulnerability had drawn out Kovac's organization, but its location had been carefully chosen. Sarah had selected this position specifically for its tactical advantages: clear sightlines in all directions, multiple exit points, and a basement storage area that connected to Vienna's extensive network of historical tunnels. Every table's position had been subtly adjusted over the past 3 years to provide cover, every mirror angled to eliminate blind spots, every possible angle of approach considered and countered. Kovac's reputation for sophistication made him more dangerous than common criminals. His organization had left a trail of corrupted businesses across 3 countries, using a combination of legal pressure and barely concealed threats to transform legitimate establishments into fronts for their artifact trafficking operations. But they had no way of knowing they had just walked into the carefully prepared territory of someone who had spent years perfecting the art of transforming ordinary spaces into tactical advantages. Through the cafe's antique windows, Sarah could see the first stars appearing above Vienna's skyline. The same stars had once guided her through operations in locations she could never discuss, during missions that would remain classified for decades. Now they watched over a different kind of operation, one where the stakes involved not just priceless artifacts, but the soul of a historic district that had survived wars, empires, and revolutions. The weight of her specialized watch, disguised as a vintage timepiece, provided familiar comfort. Inside its handcrafted case were communications capabilities that would have impressed even Kovac's technical experts. Sarah had transformed from a specialist in artifact recovery to a guardian of cultural heritage, though her methods remained as precise as ever. The quiet waitress at Café Mozart was about to demonstrate that protecting history sometimes required skills learned in its darkest chapters. Through the cafe's age-worn mirrors, Sarah caught a glimpse of something that made her pulse quicken. Volkov, retrieving a small leather portfolio from his briefcase. She recognized the distinctive red seal in the corner, identical to one she'd seen on documents recovered from a gallery raid in Prague last month. The portfolio likely contained details of their next target, perhaps even authentication papers for artifacts that hadn't yet been acquired. Heinrich's voice carried across the cafe, offering the evening's last strudel to the tourist couple by the window. The old man's cheerful tone betrayed nothing, but Sarah noted how he'd positioned himself to maintain clear sightlines to Kovac's table. Like many who'd lived through Vienna's complex history, Heinrich had developed an instinct for trouble that went beyond mere intuition. The young man with Kovac, Sarah had heard them call him Marcus, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his hand straying toward his concealed weapon for the third time in as many minutes. His nervousness made him dangerous, like a tripwire that could trigger at the slightest disturbance. Sarah had seen his type before, during operations where inexperience combined with aggression often led to unnecessary escalation. Sophie emerged. From the office, account books in hand, her path to the coffee bar taking her directly past Kovac's table. Sarah watched through the vintage espresso machine's reflection as the girl walked by, noting how Volkov's eyes followed her movement with predatory interest. The man's expression confirmed Sarah's suspicions. They knew exactly who Sophie was and her connection to Vienna's legitimate art world. The medieval church bells tolled quarter past, their deep resonance vibrating through the cafe's ancient bones. 9 chimes until closing, Sarah noted automatically. 9 chimes to prepare for whatever Kovac's group had planned. Her fingers brushed against the antique brooch at her collar, a gift from Heinrich when she'd started working at the cafe. Like many things in Sarah's world, the brooch wasn't exactly what it appeared to be. "Another coffee, Mr. Kovac?" she asked, approaching their table with measured steps. Each movement was calculated to appear servile while maintaining optimal distance for response, if needed. Through the corner of her eye, she caught a glimpse of the papers in Volkov's portfolio, architectural drawings of what appeared to be a museum layout. "Not tonight," Kovac replied, his cultured voice carrying just a hint of menace, "but we will be spending quite a bit of time here in the coming weeks. Your cafe's historic atmosphere is inspirational for our business ventures." Sarah recognized the implicit threat in his words. Café Mozart's position in the heart of Vienna's historic district made it perfect for monitoring both police movements and potential targets. Its reputation as a tourist destination provided excellent cover for meetings that needed to appear legitimate. What Kovac couldn't know was that Sarah had chosen this location for exactly the same reasons. The cafe's strategic position had allowed her to track 3 separate artifact trafficking operations over the past year alone. Her reports, sent through channels that didn't officially exist, had already led to the recovery of pieces thought lost during World War II. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The tourist couple by the window gathered their things, leaving a generous tip that Sarah knew would include a coded message. They weren't actually tourists, but part of the network she'd carefully constructed throughout Vienna's historic district. Every night, similar pairs of tourists rotated through the cafe, maintaining surveillance while appearing completely ordinary. As Sarah cleared their table, she noted how the paper napkin had been folded. 3 corners down, 1 up. The signal confirmed her suspicions. Kovac's organization was planning something big, something that went beyond their usual careful probing of potential targets. The cafe's ancient radiators hissed quietly, adding their voice to the evening's symphony of subtle sounds. Each clink of china, each footstep on the weathered wooden floor, each murmured conversation contributed to an atmosphere that had remained largely unchanged since the days when Mozart himself had taken coffee here. Sarah had learned to read. These sounds like a conductor reads a score, noting every deviation from the usual pattern. Behind the coffee bar, Heinrich began his nightly ritual of preparing the next day's strudel dough, his movements deliberately unhurried. Few would guess that the old man's recipe book, passed down through 3 generations, contained more than just culinary secrets. Its pages, like much of Café Mozart, had served multiple purposes during Vienna's turbulent history. Sarah moved through her closing routine with practiced efficiency, each action bringing her closer to the moment when Kovacs would reveal his true purpose. The skills that had once helped her recover lost masterpieces from war zones and private collections were about to be tested in a different kind of operation, one where the stakes involved not just individual artifacts, but the soul of a historic district that had survived centuries of similar threats. The weight of history pressed down like a physical presence in the cafe's intimate space. Generations of Viennese had guarded their cultural heritage against those who would exploit it, and now that duty had passed to an unlikely guardian, a woman whose training in protecting priceless treasures had led her to serve coffee in one of Europe's oldest establishments. The quiet waitress at Café Mozart was about to demonstrate that preserving history sometimes required skills learned in its darkest chapters, and that true guardianship often came in the most unexpected forms. Before Sarah Bennett poured coffee at Café Mozart, she had developed a reputation in circles that never officially convened. Her early life had been shaped by her father, a prominent museum curator whose dedication to preserving cultural heritage went far beyond normal professional bounds. Growing up surrounded by priceless artifacts, Sarah had learned to read brushstrokes. Like other children read storybooks, the distinctive silver streak in her otherwise dark hair had appeared during an operation in Damascus that remained classified. For 72 hours, she had maintained position in an abandoned bell tower, waiting for the perfect moment to intercept a shipment of looted antiquities. The stress of those 3 days, spent completely motionless as desert winds howled through. Ancient stones had left its mark, a streak of silver that started at her temple. Her father's murder had transformed her from a promising art historian into something else entirely. Thomas Bennett's death had been ruled a tragic accident, a fall from the museum's restoration scaffolding. But Sarah had recognized the signature of professionals who specialized in making murders look like accidents, the same signature she'd later encounter in operations across 4 continents. The British Museum's Special Acquisitions Division had recruited her shortly after, recognizing that her unique combination of art expertise and personal motivation made her ideal for their most sensitive operations. What began as a quest for justice evolved into a mission to protect the world's cultural heritage from those who would exploit it. At the age of 28, she had recovered the lost Magdalen panels, medieval masterpieces thought destroyed. During World War II, the operation required her to infiltrate a private collector's mountaintop estate in the Swiss Alps, identifying the authentic pieces among a collection of brilliant forgeries. Her success caught the attention of organizations that operated in the shadows of the art world. The silver streak caught the cafe's amber light as Sarah moved between tables. Each quiet step carried the same grace that had once allowed her to navigate the most sophisticated security systems ever designed. Her hands, which now served coffee with perfect Viennese precision, had once reassembled fragmented frescoes under battlefield conditions, A particularly challenging operation in Istanbul had tested even her extraordinary capabilities. Tasked with preventing the sale of looted Byzantine artifacts, she had maintained cover as a restoration specialist for 3 months. The mission's success had earned her a reputation that still echoed in certain circles, though few knew the true extent of her involvement. Heinrich's voice carried from the kitchen, humming an old Viennese waltz as he prepared for the next day. The cafe owner had his own history with protecting cultural heritage. During the Cold War, his family had helped preserve artworks that would have otherwise disappeared behind the Iron Curtain. His decision to hire Sarah hadn't been based solely on her ability to serve coffee with proper Viennese style. Sophie continued working on inventory lists, unaware that her presence in the cafe was part of a larger design. Sarah had recognized something in the young art student, the same passion for cultural preservation that she herself had possessed at that age. More importantly, Sophie's connections to Vienna's legitimate art world made her valuable in tracking the movement of questionable artifacts through official channels. The tourist couple's departure had activated a subtle shift in the cafe's security network. Similar pairs would maintain surveillance throughout the night, monitoring any unusual activity around the historic district. Sarah had established this system using techniques learned during operations that required long-term observation of target locations. Her specialized watch, disguised as a vintage timepiece, contained communication capabilities that would have impressed even the most sophisticated operators. Its handcrafted case concealed technology that could access secure networks without leaving electronic traces. The same network she had once used to coordinate multinational recovery operations. The gleaming coffee machines, which appeared to be vintage models preserved through Heinrich's careful maintenance, concealed modern surveillance equipment. Sarah had installed these systems using skills developed during operations, where observation meant the difference between success and tragedy. Each antique mirror had been carefully positioned to eliminate blind spots while maintaining the cafe's historic atmosphere. Vienna's evening air carried the scent of approaching rain through the cafe's open windows. Sarah's tactical awareness, honed through years of operations in environments far more hostile than this, noted how the changing weather would affect visibility and response times. The same calculations she had once used to plan artifact recovery. Operations now served to protect her adopted home. A particularly delicate operation in Prague had earned her the code name Curator. The mission required her to distinguish authentic medieval manuscripts from masterfully crafted forgeries while, under extreme time pressure, her success had demonstrated an almost supernatural ability to spot authenticity under any conditions. That same ability now helped her identify threats to Vienna's cultural heritage before they fully materialized. The medieval church across the street cast long shadows through the cafe's windows. Sarah had chosen this location partly because of its proximity to several potential targets, museums, galleries, and private collections that housed priceless pieces of European history. The cafe's position allowed her to monitor suspicious activity while maintaining perfect cover as nothing more than a dedicated server in a historic establishment. Heinrich emerged from the kitchen carrying fresh pastries, his movements displaying the same careful efficiency that had once helped him smuggle art treasures to safety. The old man understood more than he revealed, recognizing in Sarah someone who shared his dedication to preserving cultural heritage by any means necessary. Sarah's training hadn't just covered artifact recovery and authentication. She had studied the psychology of collectors, understanding how their passion for acquisition could transform from appreciation into obsession. This knowledge helped her identify potential threats before they escalated into actual theft attempts. The silver streak in her hair caught the light again as she moved past one of the cafe's gilded mirrors. Each silver strand marked another operation where she had helped preserve some piece of humanity's cultural heritage. The same dedication that had once driven her to recover lost masterpieces now focused on protecting Vienna's historic district from those who would exploit its treasures. Sophie's voice carried from the office, asking Heinrich about the cafe's guest book, a massive leather-bound volume that contained decades of signatures from visitors around the world. What the young student couldn't know was that the book also served as a record of suspicious activities, its entries coded in ways that only certain people could interpret. Sarah's journey from art historian to artifact recovery specialist hadn't been a straight path. Each operation had added new layers to her expertise, transforming academic knowledge into practical skills that could mean the difference between preservation and loss. Those same skills now served to protect not just individual artifacts, but an entire cultural ecosystem. The cafe's ancient radiators creaked, adding their voice to the evening symphony of subtle sounds. Sarah had learned to read these ambient noises like others read sheet music, noting every deviation from the usual pattern. This awareness developed during operations where the slightest sound could betray presence, now helped her monitor the cafe's security without obvious surveillance. Heinrich's family had operated Café Mozart through 3 generations, maintaining its position as both a cultural landmark and a guardian of Vienna's heritage. His decision to hire Sarah had been based on recognizing a kindred spirit, someone who understood that preserving history sometimes required unconventional methods. The specialized training that had made Sarah legendary in certain circles hadn't just covered physical skills. She had studied art history, conservation techniques, and authentication methods at a level that would have impressed museum curators. This knowledge, combined with field experience in recovering lost artifacts, had transformed her into something unique, an operator who could protect cultural heritage from within its own world. As evening deepened into night, Sarah continued her careful observation of the cafe's environment. Each movement, each interaction with guests carried the same precision that had once allowed her to recover priceless artifacts from seemingly impossible situations. The quiet waitress at Café Mozart had transformed her specialized skills into tools for protecting Vienna's cultural heritage, though few would ever guess the true extent of her capabilities. The weight of her father's memory pressed close in. Moments like these, Thomas Bennett had taught her that cultural heritage belonged to everyone, that preserving it meant preserving humanity's shared story. His lessons, combined with years of specialized operations, had created someone uniquely qualified to protect that heritage from those who would exploit it for personal gain. A movement in the street caught Sarah's attention, a black Mercedes, making its 3rd pass of the evening. Through the cafe's antique windows, she noted the vehicle's diplomatic plates, a detail that triggered memories of an operation in Serbia where similar vehicles had been used to transport looted artifacts. Across borders, her fingers traced the edge of her serving tray, feeling the practically invisible modifications that transformed it from simple serviceware into a tool for collecting evidence. Her specialized training had included an unexpected mentor, Dr. Elena Rossi, a world-renowned art restorer who had secretly worked with various agencies to track stolen masterpieces. Elena had taught Sarah that the key to preserving cultural heritage wasn't just in recovering stolen pieces, but in preventing their theft in the first place. Those lessons had shaped Sarah's current approach to protecting Vienna's historic district. Heinrich's daughter Maria entered through the kitchen door, her medical bag in hand. The young doctor's regular evening visits to check on her father's health provided perfect cover for delivering updates from their network of cultural heritage monitors. Throughout the city, like many in their circle, Maria had learned to hide vital information in plain sight, disguising security reports as medical charts. Sarah's time with the Special Acquisitions Division had taught her that the most dangerous threats to cultural heritage often came not from obvious criminals, but from sophisticated networks that operated within legitimate channels. Her current position at Café Mozart allowed her to monitor these networks while maintaining an unassuming presence in Vienna's cultural landscape. The operation that had earned her true recognition among heritage protection specialists had occurred in northern Italy. A collection of Renaissance manuscripts had been targeted by a network of sophisticated thieves. Sarah had spent 6 months establishing cover as a library conservator, cataloguing every attempt to probe the library's security while developing a system to protect its treasures. The success of that mission had demonstrated that prevention could be as important as recovery. Sophie's voice carried from the office again, this time discussing an upcoming exhibition at her father's gallery. Sarah noticed how the conversation caught Volkov's attention, confirming her suspicions about their interest in the gallery's new acquisition. A recently discovered Klimt study that had generated excitement in Vienna's art world. The skills that had once helped Sarah track stolen artifacts through war zones now served to protect Vienna's cultural heritage in more subtle ways. Each interaction with cafe guests provided opportunities to gather intelligence about potential threats, while her position allowed her to coordinate with legitimate cultural institutions without drawing attention. Heinrich's waltz humming transitioned to a Mozart minute, a subtle signal that their evening security check had been completed. The old man's understanding of covert operations went beyond his Cold War experience. His family had been protecting Vienna's cultural treasures since the days when Mozart himself had frequented these rooms. The silver streak in Sarah's hair caught the light once more as she adjusted a table setting. That same mission in Damascus had taught her another crucial lesson. Cultural heritage protection required patience, precision, and the ability to recognize patterns in seemingly random events. The current situation with Kovacs' organization displayed patterns she had seen before in operations across Europe. Sarah's training under Dr. Rossi had included more than just art authentication and preservation techniques. The renowned restorer had taught her to understand the psychology of art criminals, how they thought, how they planned, and most importantly, how they could be stopped before priceless pieces of history disappeared into private collections. The specialized watch at her wrist received a silent signal, one of their network's observers reporting unusual activity near the museum quarter. Sarah's experience had taught her that such activities often preceded attempts to probe security systems. Her position at the cafe allowed her to coordinate responses to these threats, while maintaining perfect cover as nothing more than a dedicated server in a historic establishment. In the years since leaving active operations with the Special Acquisitions Division, Sarah had developed a new approach to heritage protection. Instead of focusing solely on recovery operations, she had created networks of ordinary citizens, trained to recognize and report suspicious activities around cultural sites. This community-based approach had already prevented several attempted thefts. Maria's medical bag contained more than just standard equipment. Hidden compartments, designed by the same specialists who had modified Sarah's serving tray, could securely transport documentation about suspected trafficking operations. The doctor's regular rounds to check on elderly residents in the historic district provided perfect cover for monitoring suspicious activities. The evening light faded further, casting deeper shadows through the cafe's historic windows. Sarah had chosen this time of day for her shifts carefully, knowing that the transition between day and night often revealed patterns of suspicious activity that might otherwise go unnoticed. The same observational skills that had once helped her track stolen artifacts through international black markets now served to protect Vienna's cultural heritage from within. Anton Kovač hadn't always been a threat to Europe's cultural heritage. Standing at 6 feet tall with shoulders that filled his bespoke suit, he cut an imposing figure in Café Mozart's intimate space. The scar near his collar, usually hidden by custom-tailored shirts, had come from his first attempt at art acquisition, a failed effort to steal a minor Renaissance piece that had taught him the value of careful planning over brute force. Born to a prominent Belgrade family that had lost everything during the Yugoslav wars, Kovač had learned early that true power lay not in possessing beauty, but in controlling access to it. His education at the Sorbonne, though incomplete, had given him an appreciation for fine art that transformed into an obsession with acquiring it through any means necessary. Nikolai Volkov represented a new breed of art criminals, those who understood that technology and financial sophistication could accomplish what violence alone could not. His family's connections to Russian oligarchs had provided him with resources that made traditional security measures obsolete. The slight limp in his left leg, earned during a confrontation with rival collectors in Moscow, served as a constant reminder that even the most careful plans could go awry. Marcus, their young associate, shifted nervously in his seat again. Fresh from Vienna's Academy of Fine Arts, he possessed technical skills that Kovač's organization needed, the ability to spot forgeries and assess security systems with an artist's eye. His recruitment had been carefully orchestrated, starting with seemingly legitimate restoration work before gradually drawing him into more questionable activities. Through the cafe's historic mirrors, Sarah observed how Kovač's organization displayed a hierarchy more sophisticated than typical criminal enterprises. Each member played a specific role, their activities coordinated with almost military precision. Kovač provided the vision and connections. Volkov managed the technical and financial aspects, while Marcus offered the specialized knowledge needed to identify valuable targets. The problem with most security systems, Volkov explained to Marcus, his voice carrying just far enough for Sarah to hear, is that they focus on protecting objects rather than understanding their true value. His manicured hands gestured toward the architectural drawings spread before them. Every piece has multiple values, cultural, historical, monetary. Understanding these values reveals their vulnerabilities. Their methodology had evolved far beyond simple theft. Kovač's organization had penetrated legitimate art markets, using a combination of forgeries, cyber operations, and financial pressure to acquire targeted pieces. Museums and private collections across Europe had fallen victim to their sophisticated approach, often without realizing the full extent of their losses until months or years later. The black Mercedes made another pass outside the cafe, its tinted windows concealing what Sarah knew would be additional members of Kovač's team conducting surveillance. Their operation showed signs of extensive planning, the kind that preceded major acquisitions. Multiple vehicles, coordinated movements, careful documentation of the area's security patterns. Kovač's reputation in certain circles preceded him. Over the past 5 years, his organization had been linked to the disappearance of numerous significant artworks, though nothing could ever be proven definitively. His preferred method involved creating legitimate-seeming provenance for stolen pieces, allowing them to be sold through established auction houses to private collectors who asked few questions about origins. Cultural heritage, Kovač mused, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, belongs to those who can truly appreciate it. His words carried the weight of personal philosophy, revealing a world-view that justified his actions through a distorted lens of preservation. Some pieces are simply too significant to be left in provincial museums. The young Marcus absorbed these words with evident fascination, unaware that he was being shaped into another tool in Kovač's sophisticated operation. His technical skills, combined with his genuine passion for art, made him particularly valuable and particularly vulnerable to manipulation. Volkov's laptop displayed complex financial diagrams, their patterns familiar to Sarah from previous investigations into art trafficking networks. The organization had developed methods for moving both artifacts and money through seemingly legitimate channels, creating paper trails that could withstand considerable scrutiny. Their current target remained unclear, but Sarah recognized the patterns of preliminary surveillance. The architectural drawings, the frequent drive-bys, the careful attention to staff routines, all indicated preparation for a significant acquisition. Kovacs' organization never moved without extensive planning, a trait that had helped them avoid serious investigation for years. A waitress from the cafe across the street entered, ordering coffee to go. Sarah noted how Kovacs' team subtly adjusted their positions, concealing their documents while maintaining casual appearances. Their situational awareness marked them as more than simple criminals. They operated with the precision of trained professionals. The organization's success relied heavily on their ability to corrupt legitimate businesses, galleries, shipping. Companies, even security firms, had been compromised through a combination of financial incentives and carefully applied pressure. Those who resisted often found themselves facing mysterious accidents or financial difficulties that forced cooperation. Every security system has weaknesses, Volkov continued his impromptu lesson to Marcus, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had proven this point repeatedly. The trick is identifying which weaknesses can be exploited without drawing attention. His fingers traced lines on the architectural drawings that Sarah recognized as likely entry points for sophisticated intrusion attempts. Heinrich emerged briefly from the kitchen, his experienced eyes taking in the scene before him. The old man had survived decades in Vienna's cultural landscape by recognizing threats before they fully materialized. His slight nod to Sarah confirmed their shared assessment. Kovacs' presence represented more than just another criminal enterprise targeting the city's treasures. The organization's pattern of operation had become clear through careful observation. They would establish presence in an area, gradually infiltrating legitimate businesses while gathering intelligence on potential targets. Their patience and sophistication made them particularly dangerous to cultural institutions that relied on traditional security measures. Marcus pulled out a tablet, its screen displaying what appeared to be security camera feeds from nearby locations. The young artist's technical skills had clearly been enhanced since joining Kovacs' operation, demonstrating how quickly they could transform talented individuals into effective tools for their purposes. Their conversation shifted to discussing upcoming cultural events in Vienna's historic district. Sarah recognized this as another aspect of their methodology, identifying opportunities where security might be lighter due to public access requirements. Gallery openings, special exhibitions, and cultural festivals had all been exploited by their organization in the past. Kovacs' phone buzzed quietly, displaying a message that brought a slight smile to his scarred face. "It seems our friends at the ministry have approved the special exhibition permits," he mentioned to Volkov. This confirmed Sarah's suspicions about their ability to manipulate official channels, another layer of sophistication that made their operations particularly difficult to counter. The organization's influence extended beyond mere criminal activities. They had cultivated connections in regulatory agencies, customs offices, and cultural institutions across Europe. These relationships allowed them to create seemingly legitimate documentation for their illegally acquired pieces, making traditional law enforcement efforts largely ineffective. As evening deepened into night, the true extent of Kovacs' operation became increasingly clear. The casual meeting in a historic cafe masked layers of sophisticated planning and coordination. Their presence in Vienna's cultural district wasn't random. They had identified vulnerabilities that normal security measures couldn't address. Through the cafe's windows, Sarah noted additional surveillance teams taking up positions that provided coverage of multiple cultural institutions. Kovac's organization operated with a level of coordination that suggested military or intelligence training. Their movements carefully choreographed to appear random while maintaining optimal observation positions. The threat they represented went beyond simple theft. Their sophisticated approach to acquiring cultural artifacts threatened the very foundation of heritage preservation, transforming priceless pieces of history into commodities to be exploited. Their presence in Vienna's historic district signaled the beginning of an operation that could irreparably damage the city's cultural landscape. Kovac's organization had first gained notoriety during the chaos, following the collapse of the Soviet Union. Taking advantage of the confusion surrounding numerous private collections and state museums, they had developed methods for making artifacts disappear into a complex network of private holdings. Their success had attracted the attention of wealthy collectors who valued discretion above legitimacy. A subtle gesture from Volkov brought another member of their team into the cafe, a woman whose elegant appearance and perfect posture suggested years of classical dance training. Diana Kovic, their authentication specialist, had once been a respected conservator at the Louvre before financial pressures and personal ambition led her to join Kovac's enterprise. Her ability to create convincing provenance documentation for stolen artifacts had made their operation nearly impossible to prosecute. "The exhibition schedule looks particularly interesting," Diana commented, settling into their booth with practiced grace. Her eyes scanned the architectural drawings with professional interest, identifying vulnerabilities that only someone with extensive museum experience would recognize. "The new security upgrades won't be completed until after the Klimt retrospective." Marcus absorbed this information with evident excitement, unaware that he was witnessing the methodical dismantling of cultural heritage protection systems. Kovac's organization excelled at identifying these transitional periods when institutions were most vulnerable, moments between the recognition of security needs and their implementation. Through the cafe's ambient sounds, Sarah caught fragments of conversation about cargo manifests and customs documentation. This aligned with another aspect of their methodology, the use of legitimate shipping channels to move acquired pieces across borders. Their network included corrupted officials at key transit points throughout Europe, making traditional interdiction efforts ineffective. A new text message brought another slight smile to Kovac's face. "Our friends at the insurance company have approved the updated coverage," he mentioned casually. This revealed another layer of their sophistication, the manipulation of insurance policies to create opportunities for acquiring targeted pieces. By influencing risk assessments and coverage requirements, they could pressure institutions into making security compromises. Diana's tablet displayed what appeared to be conservation reports from several major European museums. Her professional background allowed her to identify which pieces might be temporarily removed from secure storage for restoration work, creating windows of opportunity for acquisition. This level of insider knowledge made their operation particularly dangerous to cultural institutions that relied on traditional security protocols. The organization's financial structure, partially visible on Volkov's laptop screen, showed a complex web of shell companies and cultural foundations. They had created a sophisticated system for laundering both artifacts and money, making it nearly impossible to trace the true ownership of acquired pieces. Each transaction was carefully documented to appear legitimate, supported by expertly forged provenance papers and authentication certificates. "Cultural preservation requires resources," Kovac explained to Marcus, his voice carrying the conviction of someone who truly believed in their distorted mission. Some institutions simply lack the capability to properly protect their collections. We provide an alternative form of conservation. This philosophy, however twisted, had helped them recruit numerous experts from legitimate cultural institutions. Sarah observed how Diana's arrival had shifted the group's dynamic. The former conservators' presence indicated they had moved from general surveillance to specific target assessment. Her expertise would be crucial in identifying which pieces could be successfully extracted and reintroduced to the market with convincing documentation. The organization's methodology had evolved through careful study of past failures. Unlike crude art thieves who relied on smash-and-grab tactics, Kovacs' team understood that successful acquisition required patience, planning, and perfect timing. They would spend months or even years preparing for a single operation, ensuring every aspect could withstand scrutiny. Through the cafe's antique mirrors, Sarah noted how each team member maintained awareness of their surroundings while appearing. Completely casual, their movements, their positioning, even their conversation volume showed evidence of professional training in counter-surveillance techniques. This wasn't just a criminal enterprise. It was a sophisticated operation run by individuals who understood both art and espionage. The true danger of Kovacs' organization lay in their ability to operate within the legitimate art world, while simultaneously undermining it. They didn't just steal cultural artifacts, they corrupted the very systems designed to protect them, transforming security measures into acquisition opportunities and conservation protocols into vulnerability assessments. The moment that revealed Sarah Bennett's true capabilities began with a simple cup of spilled coffee. As she cleaned the marble tabletop near Kovacs' group, her movements caught Diana's professional attention. The former Louvre conservator's eyes narrowed, recognizing something in Sarah's precise handling of the antique surfaces, the kind of careful technique usually reserved for handling priceless artifacts. "Interesting technique," Diana commented, her conservator's instincts triggered by Sarah's methodical cleaning pattern. "That's exactly how we used to clean sensitive surfaces." In the Louvre's restoration laboratory, Sarah's response was perfectly measured, her voice carrying just the right amount of pleasant surprise. "My grandmother restored antique furniture. She always said marble needs gentle attention." The explanation was flawless, yet Diana's expression showed she'd noticed something more, the way Sarah's hands automatically adjusted their pressure on different sections of the aged marble, responding to variations in the surface that only a trained conservator would recognize. Heinrich, watching from behind the coffee bar, observed the subtle exchange with growing tension. He'd seen similar moments before, when Sarah's expertise accidentally showed through her carefully maintained cover. Like the time she'd instinctively corrected a customer's mishandling of an 18th century porcelain cup, displaying knowledge far beyond what a typical waitress should possess. Through the cafe's ornate mirrors, Sarah caught glimpses of Volkov's increased attention. The Russian's tactical awareness had picked up on something else, the way she maintained perfect positioning relative to all exits while appearing to simply go about her duties. It was the kind of situational awareness that came from years of operational experience, not restaurant work. Marcus, still naive despite his recent recruitment into Kovacs' organization, remained focused on the architectural drawings. But Diana and Volkov exchanged glances that spoke volumes. Sarah's cover hadn't been blown, but she'd drawn the kind of attention that experienced operators knew could complicate missions. The next revealing moment came when a group of British tourists entered, discussing a recent exhibition at the Kunsthistorisches Museum. Sarah's subtle reaction to their mention of a specific Renaissance painting, a microsecond pause in her movement, caught Diana's trained eye. It was the kind of response that only someone with deep art historical knowledge would have to hear about a significant piece. Heinrich's daughter, Maria, returned from her rounds, carrying her medical bag with the same careful attention that marked all their covert communications. As she passed Sarah, their coordinated movements displayed a level of synchronization that spoke of practiced cooperation rather than casual workplace familiarity. Sarah's watch, though appearing to be a simple vintage timepiece, drew Volkov's attention when it caught the light. His experience with security systems allowed him to recognize sophisticated equipment, even when carefully disguised. The way Sarah occasionally touched it matched patterns he'd seen in coordinated operations. The cafe's evening routine continued, but with new undercurrents of tension. Diana observed how Sarah handled the antique silver service, noting the expertise revealed in her movements. Each gesture showed years of experience with handling precious objects, far beyond what would be expected from normal restaurant work. A sudden commotion outside, a minor traffic incident, provided another telling moment. While other staff members moved toward the windows to look, Sarah's reaction was markedly different. Her positioning shifted subtly, maintaining optimal coverage of both the incident and Kovach's group, while appearing to simply continue her work. Marcus finally noticed something amiss when Sarah efficiently dealt with a wine spill near their table. His artist's eye caught the precision of her movements, the same kind of careful technique taught in art restoration courses for handling delicate pigments. His expression showed growing confusion as he began to realize that their seemingly simple waitress possessed unusual expertise. The evening light through the cafe's historic windows highlighted another revealing detail: the way Sarah automatically adjusted her positioning to account for changing visibility conditions. It was the kind of adaptive behavior that came from extensive experience in surveillance operations, not years of restaurant service. Heinrich emerged from the kitchen again, this time carrying an antique ledger. Sarah's handling of the book as she helped him move it to the office displayed intimate familiarity with proper techniques for managing historic documents. Diana's sharp intake of breath confirmed she'd noticed this telling detail. The cafes. Ancient radiators hissed, creating brief clouds of steam that partially obscured the windows. Sarah's immediate, though subtle, adjustment to the changed visibility conditions demonstrated tactical awareness that Volkov couldn't miss. His hand strayed toward his phone, likely preparing to alert their surveillance teams. A delivery of fresh flowers for the cafe's tables provided another moment of revelation. Sarah's arrangement of the blooms, while appearing casual, displayed knowledge of classical composition principles taught in fine arts programs. Diana's background in art history allowed her to recognize the deliberate implementation of Renaissance proportion theories in the seemingly simple arrangements. The silver streak in Sarah's hair caught the light as she moved past one of the cafe's gilded mirrors. Her reflection revealed another telling detail: the way she used the mirror's angles to maintain surveillance of the entire space while appearing to simply check her appearance. It was the kind of sophisticated technique that marked experienced operators. Maria's return from the office prompted another subtle exchange. The coordination between her movements and Sarah's showed evidence of practiced protocols, their efficiency suggesting extensive experience in covert communications rather than simple workplace cooperation. As evening deepened, more signs of Sarah's true capabilities emerged. Her handling of delicate pastry displays demonstrated conservation techniques usually reserved for managing fragile artifacts. The way she organized serving trays followed patterns optimized for rapid deployment rather than simple food service. Marcus Becoming more aware of these inconsistencies, watched with growing interest as Sarah managed multiple tasks with military precision. His artist training helped him recognize the deliberate nature of her movements, each action calculated, each position chosen with specific purpose. The cafe's evening cleaning routine revealed more telling details. Sarah's methodical approach to maintaining the historic surfaces displayed intimate knowledge of conservation practices. Her careful attention to the aged woodwork and delicate plasterwork showed expertise that went far beyond normal janitorial duties. Diana's professional experience allowed her to recognize specific conservation techniques in Sarah's handling of the cafe's antique fixtures. The way she adjusted the historic light fixtures, her careful management of temperature and humidity levels near sensitive surfaces, all pointed to extensive training in artifact preservation. Volkov's security expertise picked up on other indicators. The way Sarah managed the flow of customers through the space suggested advanced training in crowd control and surveillance. Her positioning during conversations, her maintenance of clear sightlines while appearing casual, these were hallmarks of professional operational behavior. The evening's revelations culminated when a customer accidentally knocked over a display of historic postcards. Sarah's response was instantaneous and telling. She caught the falling items with the kind of precise handling usually reserved for protecting priceless artifacts, each movement displaying years of conservation training. Through these accumulated moments, Sarah's carefully maintained cover began showing subtle cracks, not enough to expose her completely, but sufficient to draw the attention of Kovac's experienced team. Each revealed skill, each display of expertise, added to a growing picture that suggested their simple waitress was something far more complex. The next revealing moment came when a group of art students entered, discussing restoration techniques. For Renaissance frescoes, Sarah's subtle corrections to their technical terminology, delivered while serving coffee, displayed an expertise that made Diana sit up straighter. The former Louvre conservator recognized explanations that could only come from hands-on experience with major restoration projects. An elderly professor from the university's art history department arrived for his evening coffee, carrying a heavy portfolio of photographs from recent excavations. Sarah's brief glance at the images revealed her expertise again, her eyes automatically scanning for signs of forgery or manipulation that only trained authenticators would think to check. The cafe's ancient door hinges creaked, prompting an almost imperceptible tactical adjustment from Sarah. Volkov noticed how she modified her position to account for the changed audio environment, maintaining optimal awareness while appearing to simply continue her normal routine. It was the kind of adaptive behavior that marked experienced field operators. A delivery of new coffee cups provided another telling moment. Sarah's handling of the packaging revealed intimate familiarity with protocols for managing fragile artifacts. The way she documented the condition of each piece, while appearing to simply check inventory, displayed professional conservation assessment techniques. Heinrich called out a question about the evening's special desserts in German, then French, then Italian. Sarah's responses in each language carried regional idioms and technical terms that suggested extensive international experience, not just tourist-level language skills. Diana's eyebrows raised at Sarah's perfect use of conservation-specific terminology across multiple languages. The cafe's historic lighting fixtures needed adjustment, requiring Sarah to handle delicate antique wiring. Her movements displayed intimate knowledge of period electrical systems, the kind of expertise usually found in specialists who maintained historic properties. Marcus, with his background in fine arts, recognized techniques taught in advanced preservation courses. A group of Japanese tourists struggled with their guidebook's description of Vienna's architectural history. Sarah's quiet corrections, offered while clearing their table, demonstrated deep knowledge of European architectural styles and construction techniques. Her explanations included details that only someone with extensive preservation experience would know. The evening rain against the windows created complex reflection patterns that most would find disorienting. Sarah's movements showed unconscious adjustment to these changing visual conditions, maintaining perfect situational awareness while appearing to simply go about her duties. Volkov's security training allowed him to recognize these as advanced surveillance techniques. When a customer inquired about the cafe's historic photographs, Sarah's explanation revealed intimate knowledge of early photographic processes and preservation techniques. Her casual mention of specific chemical treatments and storage requirements caught Diana's professional attention. This was expertise that went far beyond normal museum tour guide knowledge. The cafe's ancient wood panels creaked as temperature changes caused natural expansion. Sarah's immediate, though subtle, assessment of the structural implications demonstrated engineering knowledge typically found in architectural conservators. Her quick checks of specific stress points showed years of experience with historic building maintenance. A discussion about recent art auctions at the next table prompted another revealing moment. Sarah's slight reactions to mentioned prices and provenance details suggested intimate familiarity with the international art market. Diana recognized the kind of market awareness that only came from extensive experience in high-level acquisitions and authentication. The arrival of evening newspapers created another telling scene. Sarah's quick scan of multiple languages headlines showed practiced information-gathering techniques. Volkov noticed how her eyes followed specific patterns taught in intelligence operations for rapid data assessment. Heinrich asked Sarah to help move some old ledgers, providing another opportunity for her expertise to show through. Her handling of the aged paper and bindings displayed intimate knowledge of book conservation techniques. Diana observed professional-level preservation practices in what should have been a simple moving task. The cafe's collection of historic coffee grinders needed cleaning, requiring careful handling of aged mechanical components. Sarah's maintenance technique revealed detailed understanding of period mechanisms and materials. Her movements displayed the kind of expertise usually found in museum conservation workshops. As the evening crowd thinned, more subtle indicators emerged. Sarah's management of the closing routine showed evidence of professional operational protocols adapted to civilian cover. Each task, while appearing normal, followed patterns optimized for security and surveillance. The cafe's guest book required attention, its aged pages needing careful handling. Sarah's technique in managing the delicate paper and historic inks displayed professional conservation skills. Her subtle assessment of the paper's condition and environmental needs caught Diana's expert eye. A minor altercation outside the cafe revealed more of Sarah's hidden capabilities. Her instant assessment of the situation and subtle positioning adjustments displayed advanced threat evaluation skills. Volkov recognized tactical protocols he'd seen in professional security operations. The evening's final revealing moments came during the routine cleaning of the cafe's historic mirrors. Sarah's handling of the aged glass and delicate frames displayed intimate knowledge of period construction techniques and materials. Her careful attention to environmental factors and structural stress points showed years of conservation experience. These accumulated revelations created a complex picture that Kovach's team couldn't ignore. Their simple waitress possessed a combination of skills that suggested extensive training in artifact handling, conservation, surveillance, and tactical operations. Each revealed capability added another piece to a puzzle that pointed towards someone with very specialized expertise. The threat level at Café Mozart shifted dramatically when Marcus returned from a brief phone call, his artist's hands trembling. slightly as he spread new documents across the marble table. Architectural plans had been replaced by detailed security protocols, internal documents that should never have left the museum quarters' administrative offices. The Klimt exhibition's temporary storage protocols, Diana whispered, her conservators, scanning the documents with professional interest. Complete authentication records, security rotation schedules, environmental monitoring systems. Her fingers traced the paperwork with the same care she'd once used handling priceless artworks at the Louvre. Kovac leaned forward, his scarred face reflected in the cafe's gilded mirrors. "Our friend at the ministry has been quite thorough," he murmured, voice pitched for privacy. "The new security system won't be fully operational until after the exhibition opens, a necessary gap in coverage during the installation period." Through the evening rain, Sarah noticed 3 more vehicles taking positions around the historic district. Black Mercedes sedans with diplomatic plates, their windows tinted beyond legal limits. Each car held 2 occupants, their postures suggesting military or security training. The organization was mobilizing significant resources. "The installation team has been modified," Volkov reported, scanning messages on his encrypted phone. 3 of our specialists have been approved as temporary contractors. They'll have complete access during the setup phase. His slight smile suggested this infiltration had cost significant money and influence. Diana's tablet displayed renovation records for the museum's climate control system. "The backup power supply will be offline for exactly 6 hours during the upgrade," she noted. "Environmental monitoring will default to manual systems." Her expertise in conservation requirements revealed why this detail mattered. Any significant temperature or humidity fluctuation would require moving sensitive pieces to climate-controlled storage. The young Marcus fidgeted with his coffee cup, still uncomfortable with the scale of what was being planned. "The gallery's insurance requirements," he began, before Kovac silenced him with a sharp glance. The organization's newest recruit was learning that some details weren't meant to be discussed, even in seemingly private conversations. Sarah's trained eye caught another detail: subtle hand signals between Kovac's team members and someone sitting at the tourist information center across the street. Their operation extended beyond the cafe's walls, creating a surveillance web that covered multiple approaches to their target location. Heinrich emerged from the kitchen, his weathered face masking concern as he noted new arrivals at the corner table. 2 men whose tailored suits couldn't quite disguise their military bearing. More of Kovac's operation taking positions, establishing presence while maintaining civilian cover. "The transportation schedule requires attention," Volkov muttered, displaying shipping manifests on his laptop. "Our access window during the installation phase is precise. Any deviation risks activating additional security protocols." His fingers traced routes through the city's historic district, mapping approaches and potential escape routes. Diana's professional expertise revealed more concerning details as she reviewed the exhibition documentation. The pieces arriving from private collections have different security requirements than the museum's permanent holdings, she explained to Marcus. "Separate protocols, separate handling teams, multiple opportunities during transfers." The organization's methodology became clearer with each passing moment. They weren't planning a crude theft, but rather a sophisticated operation that would exploit legitimate procedures and security protocols. Their infiltration of the installation team was just one part of a larger strategy. Through the cafe's windows, Sarah observed another layer of their operation deploying. Maintenance vehicles taking positions near key intersections, their generic appearances masking sophisticated surveillance equipment. The organization had planned for multiple contingencies, establishing control over potential approach and escape routes. "The authentication team's schedule is confirmed," Diana reported, reviewing messages on her tablet. will have unrestricted access to each piece during the initial condition assessment. Her conservator's expertise would allow them to identify the most vulnerable moments in each artwork's handling procedure. Kovac's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. Our source at the insurance company has processed the policy modifications, he noted with satisfaction. Any incident during the installation period will be attributed to contractor liability rather than security failure. This detail revealed another layer of their preparation, creating plausible explanations for any potential issues. The cafe's evening routine continued, but with new undercurrents of tension. Each arrival, each departure now carried potential significance. Sarah noted how Kovac's team tracked specific individuals, maintenance workers, delivery personnel, anyone with potential access to their target location. Environmental monitoring will be key, Diana explained to Marcus, her voice carrying the authority of years in conservation. Any significant fluctuation in temperature or humidity will trigger automated responses. Pieces will be moved to secure storage following predetermined protocols. Her expertise revealed how the organization planned to use legitimate preservation requirements to their advantage. Volkov's laptop displayed more troubling information, detailed staff rotations for the museum's security team. 3 of the regular guards will be on training rotation during the installation period, he noted. Their replacements have been carefully selected. The implication was clear, more of their people positioning for access. Through the cafe's antique windows, Sarah observed additional surveillance teams deploying, couples sitting at outdoor cafes, tour guides consulting maps, delivery drivers checking packages, each one positioned to monitor specific approaches to the museum quarter. The organization's resources appeared substantial. Heinrich's daughter, Maria, returned from her medical rounds, her arrival prompting subtle adjustments in Kovac's team's positioning. They tracked her movement through the cafe with professional interest, aware that her regular visits provided potential observation opportunities. The backup power systems upgrade is scheduled for the 2nd day of installation, Volkov confirmed, reviewing technical documentation. 6 hours of reduced security coverage during the transition. His technical expertise revealed why this detail mattered. Electronic surveillance would be compromised during the upgrade. Diana's tablet showed more concerning information. Condition reports for specific artworks in the upcoming exhibition. These pieces will require special handling during installation, she explained. Custom crates, specialized environmental controls, dedicated transport protocols. Each requirement represented a potential vulnerability their operation could exploit. The organization's preparation extended to minute details. Marcus spread out building maintenance schedules, revealing planned work on the museum's ventilation system. The construction barriers will provide excellent cover for equipment movement, he noted, his artist's eye identifying practical logistics. Through the cafe's historic mirrors, Sarah caught glimpses of more operatives taking position. A window washer setting up equipment across the street, a flower vendor arranging their cart near a key intersection, each one establishing presence while maintaining perfect civilian cover. The installation team's security clearances have been processed, Volkov reported, checking his phone. Complete access to all restricted areas during the setup phase. This revealed another layer of their infiltration. Their people would have legitimate credentials for accessing sensitive areas. Diana's expertise in art conservation continued revealing vulnerabilities. The temporary storage protocols during installation are particularly interesting, she noted. Each piece requires specific environmental conditions, specific handling procedures, multiple transition points where standard security protocols must be modified to accommodate preservation requirements. The scale of the organization's operation became increasingly apparent. They had spent months, perhaps years, positioning people in key roles throughout Vienna's cultural institutions. Each position provided access, information, or influence that could be leveraged for their ultimate objective. Kovac's phone received another encrypted message, bringing a slight smile to his scarred face. "Our friends at Customs have confirmed the special handling procedures for the international loans," he mentioned. "No unexpected inspections during transport." This detail revealed another aspect of their preparation, ensuring smooth movement of artifacts across borders. Through the evening rain, Sarah observed more elements of their operation falling into place. Security contractors conducting routine patrols, maintenance workers checking utility access points, delivery vehicles establishing regular routes, each one part of their carefully orchestrated preparation. The conservation team's schedules require additional adjustment, Diana noted, reviewing staffing documents on her tablet. "We need specific personnel handling the Klimt pieces during condition assessment." Her expertise in art handling protocols revealed how they planned to manipulate legitimate conservation requirements to create security vulnerabilities. A new figure entered the cafe, an elegantly dressed woman who Sebastian, another member of Kovac's team, greeted with practiced familiarity. Dr. Elena Reeves, Sarah recognized from Art World publications, was a prominent authentication expert, whose reputation lent legitimacy to questionable acquisitions. Her presence suggested the organization was preparing to create ironclad provenance documentation for their targeted pieces. "The insurance underwriters have approved the modified security protocols," Volkov reported, scanning messages on his encrypted device. "Any incidents during installation will be classified as procedural rather than criminal events." This revelation showed how deeply they had embedded their influence within legitimate institutional frameworks. Marcus spread out another set of documents, detailed specifications for the museum's new environmental monitoring system. "The calibration period provides a perfect window," he explained, his technical knowledge showing through. "Each sensor requires individual testing, creating multiple gaps in the coverage pattern." Through the cafe's aged mirrors, Sarah noticed more surveillance, assets deploying, a television news van positioning near the museum quarter, equipment that seemed excessive for routine coverage. Tourist buses establish regular routes past key access points, their schedules too precise to be coincidental. The temporary storage facility's security upgrade is confirmed, Diana mentioned, reviewing facility documentation. Complete shutdown of existing systems during the transition. Standard protocols require moving sensitive pieces to alternate locations. Her conservation expertise revealed how legitimate preservation requirements could be exploited for unauthorized access. Heinrich's movements in the kitchen carried subtle tension as he observed another wave of Kovac's associates entering the cafe. 3 men in business attire, their posture and awareness suggesting military or security backgrounds. The organization was positioning experienced operators throughout the target area. "Transportation routes have been finalized," Volkov noted, displaying logistics plans on his laptop. "Our maintenance crews will have unrestricted access to all approach points during the installation period." The documentation revealed how thoroughly they had infiltrated basic infrastructure services around their target. Dr. Reeves engaged Marcus in a detailed discussion about authentication techniques, her expertise providing perfect cover for examining security protocols. "Modern authentication requires extensive documentation," she explained, her voice carrying academic authority. "Each piece must be thoroughly examined under specific conditions." Through the evening's deepening shadows, Sarah observed more elements of their operation becoming visible. Utility workers establishing presence near key junctions, their equipment concealing sophisticated surveillance gear, cleaning crews gaining access to restricted areas, their mundane work providing perfect cover for gathering intelligence. The conservation laboratory's renovation schedule is optimal, Diana reported, reviewing facility plans. Complete reconstruction of the climate control system during the exhibition setup. Her expertise revealed how they plan to exploit legitimate facility upgrades to create security vulnerabilities. Kovac's phone received another encrypted message, prompting a brief conversation in Serbian with one of his associates. The exchange, though quiet, carried undertones of military precision, operational details being confirmed and coordinated across multiple teams. Sarah noted how the organization's surveillance pattern extended beyond simple observation. Each positioned asset served multiple functions, gathering intelligence, establishing presence, and providing potential operational support. Their preparation showed evidence of extensive professional training and resource deployment. Access control systems will require recalibration, Volkov explained, displaying technical specifications. Each entry point must be individually tested. During the upgrade, standard security protocols will default to manual systems. His expertise revealed how they planned to exploit routine maintenance procedures. Through the cafe's historic windows, more elements of their operation became apparent. Catering vehicles conducting detailed route surveys, their movements too precise for simple delivery planning. Construction crews established work zones that provided perfect observation posts of key approach routes. Dr. Reeves's presence added another layer of sophistication to their operation. Her reputation in the art world could provide legitimate authentication for pieces that might emerge on the market months or years later, their problematic provenance obscured by expert documentation. Environmental monitoring during transport is critical, Diana emphasized, reviewing handling protocols. Each piece requires specific conditions, specific handling procedures. Any deviation triggers automatic security responses. Her conservation knowledge revealed how they planned to manipulate legitimate preservation requirements. The scale of their operation became increasingly clear as evening deepened. They had established a presence across multiple sectors: security, maintenance, transportation, conservation. Each position provided specific advantages that could be leveraged during their operation. Sarah observed another subtle exchange between Kovac's team members and their external surveillance assets. Hand signals and positioning adjustments that suggested military or intelligence training, their movements coordinated with professional precision. The temporary exhibition space requires specialized security protocols, Volkov noted, reviewing facility documentation. Standard measures must be modified to accommodate conservation requirements. Each modification creates specific operational opportunities. His technical expertise revealed how they planned to exploit legitimate procedural adjustments. Through the cafe's ambient sounds, Sarah caught fragments of conversation about insurance requirements and liability coverage. Their operation had accounted for financial and legal contingencies, creating plausible explanations for any potential security anomalies during the installation period. The organization's preparation showed evidence of long-term planning and resource commitment. They had positioned assets throughout Vienna's cultural infrastructure, each one providing specific capabilities that could be activated when needed. Their operation wasn't just about acquiring targets. It was about establishing permanent presence within legitimate institutions. Professor Stefan Adler entered Café Mozart with the deliberate pace of someone who had walked its floors for decades. His appearance, rumpled tweed jacket and wire-rimmed glasses, suggested nothing more remarkable than another academic seeking his evening coffee. What Kovac's team couldn't know was that the elderly professor had once been the Kunsthistorisches Museum's chief authentication expert, his seemingly absent-minded demeanor masking one of Europe's sharpest minds in art security. "The usual, Professor?" Sarah asked, already preparing his preferred blend. Their daily interaction looked like nothing more than routine customer service, but each exchange carried coded information about suspicious activities in Vienna's cultural institutions. The professor settled at his regular table, positioning himself with a clear view of Kovac's group while appearing absorbed in his academic papers. His trained eye caught details that most would miss: the slight bulge of concealed equipment under Diana's tailored jacket, the military precision in Volkov's posture. "Fascinating article about the upcoming Klimt exhibition," he commented, voice carrying just far enough for nearby tables to hear. "The conservation challenges are particularly interesting." Each word was carefully chosen, conveying specific information about potential security vulnerabilities he'd identified during his morning lecture at the museum. Through the cafe's entrance came Dr. Marta Schröder, a conservation scientist whose work with advanced imaging technology had revolutionized art authentication procedures. Her regular evening visits to discuss restoration techniques with Professor Adler provided perfect cover for monitoring suspicious activities in Vienna's art world. "The new multispectral imaging results are quite revealing," Marta mentioned, settling into her usual chair. Her casual reference to technical procedures masked discussion of unauthorized access attempts at the museum's conservation laboratory. Some interesting patterns emerged in the preliminary data. Heinrich emerged from the kitchen, carrying a tray of traditional Viennese pastries. The cafe owner's 3 decades of experience in Vienna's historic district had given him an unparalleled network of contacts throughout the city's cultural institutions. His daily interactions with suppliers, officials, and regular customers provided invaluable intelligence about potential threats. "The strudel is particularly good today," he announced, his voice carrying a subtle emphasis that alerted his network to increased surveillance activity around the museum quarter. "Made with a very traditional recipe." The code phrase signaled that unauthorized individuals had been observed documenting security patrol patterns. Maria's return from her medical rounds brought another layer of surveillance capability. Her position as a respected physician gave her access to various buildings throughout the historic district. Regular house calls allowed her to monitor suspicious activities while maintaining perfect professional cover. "The renovation work at the Belvedere is causing quite a disturbance," she mentioned, while checking Heinrich's blood pressure. Her casual observation conveyed specific information about unusual equipment deliveries observed during her morning rounds. "Several of my patients have commented on the increased activity." Through the cafe's historic mirrors, Sarah noticed Lisa Weber entering, a graduate student whose research into Renaissance art provided excellent cover for monitoring auction house activities. Her academic credentials gave her legitimate reason to track the movement of significant pieces through Vienna's art market. "The symposium schedule looks particularly interesting," Lisa commented to Professor Adler, her voice carrying just the right amount of scholarly enthusiasm. The seemingly innocent discussion of academic events masked reports about suspicious pattern changes in private collection sales. The evening's regular customers included other members of their network. Thomas Bauer, a retired locksmith whose decades of experience with historic buildings made him invaluable in identifying unauthorized access attempts. His daily coffee breaks provided opportunities to report suspicious changes in building security systems. "The cathedral's new locks are finally settling in," he mentioned to Heinrich, his expert knowledge allowing him to recognize signs of security system tampering. Though some of the older mechanisms still need attention. His observation carried specific warnings about attempted security breaches. Anna Klein, a senior conservator at the Museum of Applied Arts, entered carrying portfolios of restoration documentation. Her position gave her intimate knowledge of legitimate conservation procedures, allowing her to identify suspicious patterns in artwork handling requests. "The humidity fluctuations are causing some concern," she noted, sharing technical photographs with Professor Adler. Their discussion of environmental monitoring, masked observations of unusual access requests to climate-controlled storage areas. Several pieces have required special handling procedures. The cafe's evening routine incorporated other surveillance assets. Josef Wagner, a transportation coordinator whose knowledge of Vienna's delivery schedules helped track suspicious movement patterns. His regular updates about route changes and unusual shipments provided crucial intelligence about potential trafficking activities. The construction work is affecting several regular routes, he mentioned while ordering his evening coffee. His casual comment conveyed specific information about unauthorized vehicles observed near restricted loading areas. Some interesting adjustments to standard procedures. Through the aged windows came Clara Zimmerman, an insurance assessor whose work with cultural institutions gave her access to sensitive security information. Her regular meetings with Professor Adler to discuss policy requirements provided cover for sharing intelligence about suspicious pattern changes in art handling procedures. The policy modifications for the exhibition are quite extensive, she noted, reviewing documentation with practiced efficiency. Her expertise allowed her to identify unusual changes in insurance requirements that might indicate planned criminal activity. Several interesting conditions have been added recently. The cafe's position in Vienna's historic district made it an ideal hub for their network. Regular customers included restoration specialists, security consultants, and cultural heritage experts, each one providing specific capabilities for monitoring and protecting the city's artistic treasures. Marcus Bachmann, a lighting designer, specializing in museum installations, arrived for his evening coffee. His work gave him legitimate reason to access restricted areas during exhibition setup, allowing him to observe suspicious activities while maintaining professional cover. The new LED systems require careful calibration, he explained to Professor Adler, his technical knowledge helping identify unauthorized equipment installations. Some interesting challenges with historic architecture. His observations provided crucial information about potential security system vulnerabilities. The network extended beyond the cafe's regular customers. Eva Hoffman, a municipal architect specializing in historic preservation, entered carrying building plans for upcoming renovations. Her position gave her access to structural documentation that could reveal unauthorized modifications to security systems. The foundation work has revealed some interesting features, she mentioned while sharing technical drawings with Heinrich. Her expertise allowed her to identify suspicious alterations to building access points, several modifications not shown in the original plans. Through the evening's deepening shadows came Dr. Robert Fisher, a materials scientist whose work with advanced scanning technology provided crucial authentication capabilities. His regular consultations with Professor Adler allowed them to track suspicious patterns in artwork composition analysis. The spectroscopic results show some fascinating anomalies, he noted, sharing technical data that helped identify potential forgeries. Several unexpected signatures in the preliminary scans. His expertise provided essential verification capabilities for their protection network. The cafe's historic atmosphere concealed sophisticated coordination capabilities. Each regular customer, each casual interaction contributed to a comprehensive surveillance network that monitored threats to Vienna's cultural heritage. Their combined expertise provided coverage that no traditional security system could match. Katharina Berger arrived next. Her position as head librarian at the National Library's rare book collection, providing crucial intelligence about suspicious research patterns. Her ability to track unusual information requests helped identify potential targeting of specific cultural artifacts. The recent queries about medieval manuscript preservation techniques are intriguing, she mentioned to Professor Adler, her voice pitched for privacy. Several visiting scholars have shown particular interest in transportation protocols. Her observations revealed patterns that could indicate preparation for theft attempts. Through the cafe's entrance came Werner Schmidt, a restoration equipment specialist whose knowledge of conservation technology helped identify unauthorized scanning attempts. His regular maintenance visits to various museums allowed him to spot suspicious modifications to preservation equipment. The new imaging system requires specialized calibration, he explained, while sharing technical specifications with Dr. Schroeder. Some interesting variations in the baseline readings. His expertise helped detect attempts to use legitimate conservation procedures as cover for security probing. Sophie Müller, a concert pianist whose regular performances in historic venues provided access to restricted areas, entered carrying sheet music. Her artistic credentials gave her perfect cover for observing suspicious activities during cultural events. The acoustics in the Musikverein have changed subtly, she noted while discussing upcoming performances. Her trained ear could detect unauthorized modifications to historic buildings that might indicate security breaches. Some interesting resonance patterns in the lesser-used corridors. The network included Martin Gruber, an environmental systems engineer whose work with climate control technology in cultural institutions helped track suspicious access attempts. His regular maintenance checks provided opportunities to identify unauthorized equipment installations. The humidity fluctuations in the storage areas show unusual patterns, he reported while reviewing environmental data with Anna Klein. Several sensors have required recalibration recently. His technical knowledge helped detect attempts to manipulate preservation environments for unauthorized access. Dr. Isabella Wagner, a forensic chemist specializing in historic pigments, joined Professor Adler's table. Her expertise in materials analysis provided essential capabilities for identifying sophisticated forgeries and tracking the movement of authentic pieces. The spectral analysis of the new acquisitions reveals some fascinating details, she mentioned. While sharing laboratory results, several pieces show unexpected trace elements. Her scientific knowledge helped verify the authenticity of artworks entering the market through questionable channels. Through the cafe's antique mirrors, Sarah observed Felix Bauer entering, a security systems consultant whose knowledge of advanced surveillance technology helped identify sophisticated infiltration attempts. His regular equipment assessments allowed him to spot unauthorized monitoring devices. The new motion sensors require precise alignment, he explained, while discussing technical specifications. Some interesting interference patterns in certain areas. His expertise helped detect attempts to compromise security systems during legitimate upgrades. Luisa Romano, an art insurance investigator with international experience, arrived for her evening meeting with Clara Zimmerman. Her knowledge of global trafficking patterns helped identify sophisticated criminal operations attempting to establish presence in Vienna. The policy adjustment requests show some familiar patterns, she noted while reviewing documentation. Several interesting similarities to cases in other European cities. Her experience helped track the movement of criminal organizations through legitimate financial channels. The network extended to Victor Novak, a transportation security specialist whose knowledge of secure shipping procedures helped identify vulnerable points in artwork movement. His position allowed him to track suspicious pattern changes in cultural artifact transportation. The new routing protocols present some interesting challenges, he mentioned while discussing logistics with Joseph Wagner. Several unusual modifications to standard procedures. His expertise helped detect attempts to exploit legitimate shipping channels for unauthorized purposes. Through the evening shadows came Dr. Elena Weber, a digital security expert whose work with museum databases helped track suspicious access patterns. Her position gave her insight into attempts to manipulate digital documentation for cultural artifacts. The authentication algorithms have detected some anomalies, she reported, while sharing data analysis results. Several interesting variations in access patterns. Her technical knowledge helped identify sophisticated attempts to alter digital provenance records. The cafe's regular customers included Julia Keller, a restoration textile specialist whose work with historic fabrics helped identify unauthorized sampling attempts. Her expertise allowed her to detect sophisticated methods of gathering material for forgery production. The fiber analysis results are particularly revealing, she explained while reviewing technical data with Dr. Fisher. Some unexpected characteristics in recent samples. Her knowledge helped track attempts to create convincing reproductions of historic textiles. Each member of the network brought unique capabilities that complemented their collective mission. Dr. Michael Reiner, a photography conservator, entered carrying portfolios of technical documentation. His expertise in historic photographic processes helped identify sophisticated reproduction attempts. The spectral imaging reveals some interesting details, he noted, while sharing analysis results. Several unexpected signatures in the emulsion layers. His knowledge helped detect attempts to create convincing reproductions of historic photographs. The network's coordination extended to Paula Weiss, an architectural historian whose research into historic building modifications helped identify unauthorized structural changes. Her academic credentials provided perfect cover for monitoring suspicious construction activities. The renovation documentation shows some fascinating discrepancies, she mentioned while reviewing building plans with Eva Hoffman, several interesting variations from historical records. Her expertise helped detect attempts to create unauthorized access points in historic structures. Through the cafe's ambient sounds came discussions between Georg Fischer, a paper conservator, and Katharina Berger. Their combined expertise in historic document preservation helped identify sophisticated forgery attempts. The watermark analysis has revealed some unexpected patterns, he explained while sharing magnified images. Several interesting variations in fiber alignment. Their technical knowledge helped track attempts to create convincing reproductions of historic documents. The network's effectiveness relied on their ability to maintain perfect civilian cover while coordinating sophisticated surveillance operations. Each member's professional expertise provided legitimate reasons for their presence in various cultural institutions, allowing them to monitor threats without drawing attention. The first sign of imminent confrontation came when Kovac abruptly closed his leather portfolio, the sharp sound cutting through the cafe's evening ambiance. His scarred face reflected in the antique mirrors as he turned towards Sarah, eyes carrying calculated assessment rather than casual interest. "Tell me," he began, voice pitched for privacy but carrying unmistakable authority, "how long have you worked in this charming establishment?" The question seemed innocent, but Sarah recognized the tactical probe, testing her cover story while establishing a dominant position in the conversation. Through the cafe's windows, she noted two of his surveillance vehicles adjusting position, blocking potential exit routes. The organization was implementing containment protocols, their movements suggesting professional training in close-quarter operations. 3 years next month, Sarah responded, her voice carrying precisely calibrated warmth while maintaining optimal distance from their table. The professor there was one of our first regular customers after I started. Her gesture toward Adler seemed casual, but served to remind Kovac's team that they weren't operating in isolation. Diana's hand strayed toward her designer handbag, the movement catching Professor Adler's attention. The former museum authentication. Expert recognized the subtle tell. The bag likely contained more than just conservation tools and documentation. The cafe's historic atmosphere must be quite different from your previous work experience, Kovac continued, each word carefully chosen. One imagines serving coffee requires different skills than your earlier career. His emphasis on different carried clear implication. They'd identified inconsistencies in her background. Heinrich emerged from the kitchen, his movements deliberately unhurried as he positioned himself behind the counter. The old man's hands moved with practiced efficiency, preparing coffee while maintaining clear sightlines to all potential points of conflict. The preservation of historic spaces requires attention to detail, Sarah replied, matching Kovac's subtle emphasis, something I'm sure you appreciate in your line of work. The measured response acknowledged his probe while establishing her own awareness of the situation's underlying tension. Volkov's laptop screen reflected in the cafe's gilded mirrors, showing what appeared to be personnel files, likely background, information they'd gathered on the cafe's staff and regular customers. Their operation had moved from general surveillance to specific target assessment. Indeed, Kovac smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes, though sometimes preservation requires selective removal of certain elements. For proper conservation, you understand. The thinly veiled threat carried professional weight. They were prepared to eliminate obstacles to their operation. Maria returned through the cafe's side entrance, her medical bag providing perfect cover for the secure communications equipment it contained. Her arrival prompted subtle adjustments in Kovac's team's positioning, their tactical awareness revealing professional training. Preservation takes many forms, Sarah countered, her voice maintaining perfect composure while adjusting her own position for optimal tactical advantage, each requiring specific expertise and appropriate handling techniques. The response carried its own warning. She recognized their probe and was prepared for escalation. The young Marcus shifted uncomfortably, his artist's sensitivity picking up on undercurrents of tension that his recent training hadn't prepared him for. His hand strayed toward his concealed weapon, drawing a sharp glance from Diana that halted. The amateur story. Speaking of expertise, Kovac continued, his scarred face reflecting a calculated assessment. Your handling of our earlier coffee service showed interesting technique, almost professional-level precision in artifact handling. The observation confirmed Sarah's suspicion. They'd noticed details that compromised her cover. Through the cafe's historic windows, more of their surveillance assets took position. A window washer setting up equipment that provided perfect observation angles. A flower vendor whose cart contained sophisticated monitoring equipment. Tourists whose cameras focused more on building access points than architectural features. Some things require careful attention, Sarah responded, her movements maintaining optimal distance while appearing completely natural. Proper handling prevents misfortune. Accidents. The emphasis on accidents carried specific weight. She recognized their containment tactics and was prepared to respond. Professor Adler's voice carried across the cafe, discussing medieval manuscript preservation techniques with Dr. Schroeder. Their scholarly conversation provided perfect cover for tactical communication, alerting their network to the escalating situation. Accidents can be quite unfortunate, Kovac agreed, his tone carrying professional menace, particularly in historic spaces with so many delicate elements. His gesture encompassed the cafe's antique fixtures and priceless artwork, implying collateral damage wouldn't concern their operation. Heinrich's daughter returned from checking the cafe's storage areas, her movements conveying coded confirmation. Their emergency protocols were ready for activation. The old man's response, a subtle adjustment of coffee cups on the counter, acknowledged received status. Historical spaces have survived many challenges, Sarah noted, her efficiency in clearing nearby tables maintaining tactical positioning. While appearing routine, their preservation often depends on dedicated caretakers. The response established clear boundaries. Their threats wouldn't compromise her position. Diana's tablet displayed new information that drew Kovach's attention, likely additional background data on Sarah's cover identity. The organization's resources appeared substantial, their intelligence-gathering capabilities suggesting access to restricted databases. "Dedication is admirable," Kovach responded, his scarred face reflecting professional assessment. Though sometimes, loyalty to outdated institutions can be professionally limiting. The implied offer carried both threat and opportunity. They were providing options before escalating the situation. Through the cafe's ambient sounds, Sarah caught fragments of communications between their surveillance teams. Multiple assets coordinating positions, establishing coverage of potential escape routes, preparing for possible confrontation scenarios. "Professional considerations vary," she countered, her movements maintaining perfect efficiency while establishing optimal response positions. Some value preservation above personal advancement. The measured reply acknowledged their offer while confirming her own position. The evening light through historic windows cast deepening shadows, creating complex patterns of visibility that both sides adjusted to with professional awareness. Each movement, each position shift, carried tactical significance beneath seemingly casual behavior. "Values can be reassessed when circumstances change," Kovach continued, his voice carrying calculated persuasion. "Preservation sometimes requires adaptation to new methodologies." The suggestion revealed another layer of their approach, attempting to recruit rather than eliminate potential obstacles. Heinrich emerged briefly, his weathered face showing careful assessment as he noted new arrivals taking position near the cafe's entrance. More of Kovach's team, establishing presence, their movements suggesting tactical training in urban operations. "Methodology should serve preservation," Sarah responded, her efficiency in managing table service, maintaining perfect cover while establishing defensive positions, not compromise its fundamental purpose. The reply carried professional weight. She recognized their recruitment attempt, but remained committed to her mission. Professor Adler's academic discussion shifted to conservation techniques for Renaissance paintings, the technical terminology providing coded updates about surveillance team positions around the cafe's perimeter. Their network's coordination remained invisible beneath scholarly debate. "Purpose is often a matter of perspective," Kovach observed, his scarred face reflecting professional calculation. "What some see as compromise, others recognize as necessary evolution." The philosophy masked tactical assessment. They were evaluating her potential responses to escalation. Through the cafe's antique mirrors, Sarah noted additional team members taking position in the tourist information center across the street. Their operation was mobilizing significant resources, suggesting they considered her a serious potential threat to their plans. "Your attention to detail is quite remarkable," Diana interjected, her conservator's expertise lending weight to the observation. "The way you handled that antique silver service earlier, very professional technique." Her words carried dual purpose, acknowledging Sarah's skills while confirming their suspicions about her background. The evening rain against historic windows created complex reflection patterns that both sides utilized for surveillance. Each droplet-distorted image provided additional tactical information, the atmospheric conditions incorporated into their strategic calculations. Professional standards vary by institution, Sarah responded, adjusting a table setting with practiced precision. Some emphasize preservation of both objects and principles. Her emphasis on principles carried clear meaning. She recognized their attempt to exploit her expertise, but remained committed to cultural protection. Volkov's phone displayed new information that drew his immediate attention. Interesting. Career trajectory, he murmured to Kovac. Our friend at the ministry found some gaps in the employment record. The intelligence confirmed they had access to restricted personnel databases, their investigation reaching sophisticated levels. Heinrich's voice carried from the kitchen, discussing traditional Viennese recipes with apparent nostalgia. The conversation masked tactical communications, updating their network about new surveillance positions being established around the cafe's perimeter. Employment records can be quite revealing, Kovac noted, his scarred face reflecting professional assessment. Though sometimes they are unexpected transitions in expertise. The observation served as both probe and warning. They had uncovered elements of her actual background. Maria's return route from her medical rounds took her past key tactical positions, her movements appearing completely natural while gathering intelligence about Kovac's team deployment. Each pause to check her medical bag provided an opportunity for surveillance updates. Expertise often develops through unexpected channels, Sarah countered, her efficiency in managing coffee service, maintaining perfect cover while establishing defensive positions. Experience in one field can provide a unique perspective in another. The response acknowledged their intelligence while neither confirming nor denying their suspicions. Through the cafe's aged wooden floors, vibrations carried information about movement patterns outside. Sarah's tactical awareness, honed through years of operations, noted the subtle changes, indicating additional team members taking position around the building. Perspective is valuable, Diana agreed, her conservator's training evident in her precise movements, though sometimes it reveals inconsistencies in presentation. Her observation targeted specific details she'd noticed in Sarah's handling of historic items, techniques that suggested professional conservation training. Professor Adler's academic discussion shifted to authentication techniques for medieval manuscripts, his scholarly expertise providing perfect cover for tactical updates. Each technical term carried coded information about surveillance team movements and potential confrontation scenarios. Presentation serves function, Sarah replied, her movements maintaining optimal position while appearing completely routine. Though function sometimes requires adaptability in approach. The measured response established professional boundaries while acknowledging the underlying tactical situation. Kovac's phone received another encrypted message, prompting subtle adjustment in his team's positioning. Our research suggests your adaptability has been quite extensive, he noted, voice carrying a calculated assessment. Perhaps more than typical service industry experience would explain. The cafe's historic light fixtures cast complex shadow patterns that both sides utilized. For tactical advantage, each illuminated area, each shaded corner, factored into their strategic calculations as the confrontation continued to build. Experience provides valuable lessons, Sarah responded, her efficiency in clearing tables, maintaining perfect cover while establishing response positions, particularly about the importance of proper preservation techniques. The reply carried professional weight. She recognized their intelligence gathering, but remained committed to her mission. Through the evening's deepening atmosphere, more elements of their containment operation became visible. Security contractors establishing presence near emergency exits, maintenance workers positioning equipment to block potential escape routes, delivery vehicles creating subtle barriers to movement. Preservation can be interpreted broadly, Kovac observed, his scarred face reflecting tactical calculation. Some see it as maintaining the status quo, others as facilitating necessary transitions. The philosophy masked strategic assessment. They were evaluating her potential responses to direct confrontation. Dr. Schroeder's discussion of pigment analysis techniques provided additional coded updates about surveillance positions. Her technical expertise in conservation science offered perfect cover for tactical communication while maintaining scholarly appearance. Interpretation should serve protection, Sarah countered, her movements displaying perfect efficiency while maintaining optimal defensive positioning, not compromise fundamental principles of preservation. The response established clear boundaries. She recognized their containment tactics but remained prepared for escalation. Heinrich emerged briefly, his weathered face showing careful assessment as he noted new arrivals taking position near the cafe's service entrance. More of Kovach's team establishing presence, their movements suggesting tactical training in urban operations. Protection takes many forms, Diana noted, her conservator's expertise lending authority to the observation. Though sometimes traditional methods prove insufficient for modern challenges, her words carried professional assessment. They were offering alternatives before escalating the confrontation. The evening light through historic windows created complex patterns of visibility that both sides adapted to with practiced awareness. Each shadow, each illuminated space provided tactical information that influenced their strategic positioning. Through the cafe's ambient sounds, Sarah caught fragments of communication between Kovach's surveillance teams, multiple assets coordinating positions, establishing coverage of potential escape routes, preparing for possible confrontation scenarios. Their operation showed evidence of professional training in urban tactical operations. The true nature of Sarah's mission crystallized in a moment of quiet revelation as she moved past the cafe's oldest mirror, an ornate piece that had witnessed centuries of Vienna's history. Her reflection caught the silver streak in her hair, a mark earned not in combat or covert operations, but during the longest night of her life at the Kunsthistorisches Museum 5 years ago. That night had transformed her understanding of cultural preservation forever. She'd been working as a consultant, analyzing security protocols for a special exhibition of recovered World War II artworks. The exhibition represented hope, pieces, once thought lost forever, returned to their rightful place in humanity's shared heritage. Some believe art belongs to those who can protect it best. Kovach's voice carried across the cafe, interrupting her memories. His words echoed those she'd heard that night, spoken by another man who believed power granted rights over cultural heritage. Through the cafe's windows, the lights of the Kunsthistorisches Museum glowed in the distance. Sarah's hand unconsciously touched the vintage brooch at her collar, a gift from Dr. Marcus Rothschild, the brilliant conservator who had taught her that true preservation meant more than just protecting physical objects. Protection requires understanding value beyond market prices, she responded, the words carrying weight earned through personal loss. That night 5 years ago had cost more than just artifacts. It had claimed the life of her mentor and transformed her approach to cultural heritage defense. Heinrich emerged from the kitchen, his movements carrying subtle tension. He'd been there that night too, though Kovach's team couldn't know that the cafe owner's past included helping track stolen artworks across Cold War borders. His understanding of Sarah's mission went deeper than mere employment. The market determines value, Diana countered, her conservator's expertise evident in her tone. Private collectors often provide better preservation than underfunded institutions. Her argument masked a deeper truth. The organization saw cultural heritage as a commodity to be controlled rather than a legacy to be protected. Professor Adler's voice carried across the cafe, discussing preservation ethics with Dr. Schroeder. Their scholarly debate provided cover for a more personal truth. Both had lost colleagues to those who viewed art as a possession rather than a responsibility. Their commitment to protection came from witnessing destruction. True value transcends ownership, Sarah replied, her efficiency in serving coffee masking years of dedication to cultural preservation. The night at the museum had taught her that artifacts weren't just objects to be secured. They were physical links to humanity's shared story, each piece irreplaceable. Through the cafe's antique mirrors, she caught glimpses of Kovach's team exchanging glances. They saw her as an obstacle to their operation, not understanding that her presence represented something larger, a commitment to protecting cultural heritage that went beyond institutional boundaries. Maria's return brought another layer of meaning to the confrontation. Her medical bag contained not just communications equipment, but also documentation of previous losses, records of artifacts and lives destroyed by those who valued profit over preservation. Each file represented a lesson learned at terrible cost. Institutional boundaries become fluid in our modern world, Kovach observed, his scarred face reflecting tactical assessment. Traditional protections sometimes require adaptation to new realities. His philosophy masked a brutal truth. They saw cultural heritage as a resource to be exploited rather than preserved. The silver streak in Sarah's hair caught the evening light as she moved between tables. It marked not just that one night of loss, but a commitment made in its aftermath to protect cultural heritage through methods that traditional security couldn't provide. Each silver strand represented a lesson learned through sacrifice. Reality is defined by choices, she countered, maintaining perfect cover while establishing defensive positions. Some choose to protect, others to exploit. The response carried personal weight. She had witnessed the consequences of exploitation, had seen priceless artifacts disappear into private collections, never to return. Heinrich's voice carried from the kitchen, humming an old Viennese waltz that held special significance. It was the same melody that had played in the museum cafe that night, before alarms shattered the peace and violence claimed lives in the name of acquisition. Protection takes many forms, Diana noted, her conservator's training evident in her precise movements. Private preservation often succeeds where public institutions fail. Her argument ignored the fundamental truth Sarah had learned, that cultural heritage belonged to humanity, not to individuals with means to acquire it. Through the cafe's historic windows, lights from the museum quarter created patterns of illumination that mirrored that fateful night. Sarah's commitment had been forged in those same lights, watching as years of dedicated preservation work was threatened by those who saw only profit potential. Success should be measured in preservation, not possession, she responded, her movements maintaining tactical advantage while appearing routine. The philosophy wasn't just professional, it had been written in blood and loss, taught by those who gave their lives protecting humanity's shared heritage. Professor Adler's academic discussion shifted to ethical considerations in art conservation, each carefully chosen word carrying personal meaning. He had lost friends to those who viewed cultural heritage as a commodity, had seen collections destroyed by those who valued profit over preservation. Possession often ensures preservation, Kovach countered, his tactical assessment missing the deeper truth. Private collections protect pieces that might otherwise be lost to institutional neglect. His argument ignored the cost of such protection, the removal of cultural heritage from public access and shared memory. The cafe's ancient radiators hissed, creating acoustic patterns that masked subtle communications. Each sound carried Echoes of that night at the museum, when similar background noise had hidden approaching danger until too late. The lesson had taught Sarah the importance of constant vigilance. Loss takes many forms, she noted, her efficiency in service masking years of dedication. Some artifacts survive physically but die spiritually when removed from their cultural context. The philosophy came from witnessing destruction, seeing priceless pieces disappear into vaults, removed from the heritage they represented. Maria's movements carried subtle tension as she passed Kovac's table. She had treated survivors of similar operations and had seen the human cost of viewing cultural heritage as a commodity to be acquired rather than a legacy to be protected. Her commitment to their mission came from healing those wounds. Context evolves, Diana observed, her conservator's expertise providing authority. Private preservation allows artifacts to transcend traditional boundaries. Her argument ignored the fundamental truth Sarah had learned through loss, that cultural heritage derived meaning from public engagement, not private possession. Through the cafe's ambient sounds, Sarah caught fragments of tactical communications that echoed past confrontations. She had heard similar coordination during that night at the museum and had learned to recognize the patterns of those who viewed protection as a means to control rather than preserve. The weight of Dr. Rothschild's final lesson pressed close in moments like these. True preservation, he had said, means ensuring cultural heritage remains alive in public memory, not just secure in private vaults. Those words, spoken hours before violence claimed his life, had shaped Sarah's understanding of her mission. Heinrich emerged briefly, his weathered face showing careful assessment. He had helped Sarah understand that protection meant more than physical security. It required creating networks of people committed to preserving cultural heritage for future generations. His cafe had become a hub for that mission. Our methods ensure survival, Kovac stated, his scarred face reflecting tactical calculation. Traditional protections often fail against modern threats. His observation missed the essential truth. Sarah had learned that night that true protection came from community commitment, not institutional barriers. The evening light through historic windows cast shadows that mirrored memories of that fateful night. Sarah had learned then that cultural heritage faced threats more subtle than simple theft, philosophical justifications that transformed preservation into possession, protection into control. Professor Adler's scholarly discussion provided cover for deeper truths about their mission. Each academic reference carried personal meaning. Lessons learned through loss, commitment forged in confrontation with those who saw cultural heritage as a resource to be exploited. The silver streak in Sarah's hair caught the light again. As she moved past ancient mirrors, it marked not just personal loss, but a transformation in understanding how cultural heritage could be protected. Traditional security hadn't saved the museum that night, but a network of dedicated individuals might have. The resolution at Café Mozart unfolded with the same precision that had once guided Sarah's artifact recovery operations. As evening deepened into night, the confrontation reached its critical moment, not with violence, but with an understanding that would transform Vienna's approach to cultural heritage protection. "Your operation ends here," Sarah stated quietly, her voice carrying authority earned through years of preservation work. "The exhibition will proceed under enhanced security protocols that even your sophisticated methods can't bypass." Each word carried weight, backed by absolute certainty. Through the cafe's historic windows, lights began appearing in surrounding buildings, subtle signals that their network had fully activated. Museum conservators, security specialists, art historians, and preservation experts had taken positions throughout the district, creating a web of protection that no traditional security system could match. Kovac's scarred face reflected professional assessment as he noted museum staff entering buildings after hours, conservation vehicles positioning at key intersections, technical specialists conducting late-night equipment checks. His organization's careful preparation encountered something unexpected, a community united in cultural protection. "You've created quite an impressive network," he acknowledged, with tactical expertise recognizing the scale of their operation. Though some might question whether such extensive measures truly serve preservation, his observation carried an underlying threat. They had resources to overcome traditional security. Heinrich emerged from the kitchen, his movements deliberate as ancient floorboards creaked beneath precise steps. "Preservation requires dedication," the old man stated, voice carrying authority earned through decades of protecting Vienna's heritage. "Something your organization fundamentally misunderstands. Diana's conservator's training allowed her to recognize signs of professional preparation throughout the district. Conservation laboratories activating specialized equipment, authentication experts conducting late-night analysis, preservation specialists implementing enhanced monitoring protocols. Each activity represented another layer of protection. Our methods have succeeded where traditional security failed," she countered, expertise evident in her assessment. "Private collections often provide better preservation than public institutions." Her argument encountered Sarah's unwavering certainty. Protection meant more than physical security. Professor Adler's scholarly discussion shifted to modern preservation philosophy, each carefully chosen word carrying tactical significance. "Cultural heritage thrives through public engagement," he noted, academic authority masking strategic communication. Removal to private collections fundamentally diminishes historical value. Through the cafe's antique mirrors, Sarah observed Kovac's team processing new information. Their surveillance assets reported increased activity throughout the museum quarter, conservation teams implementing enhanced protocols, security, specialists conducting system upgrades, preservation experts establishing additional monitoring. "You've positioned your people well," Volkov acknowledged, technical expertise recognizing professional deployment patterns. Though such extensive coverage requires significant resources to maintain, his observation missed the essential truth. Their network operated through dedication rather than financial motivation. Maria's return brought confirmation. Medical facilities throughout the district had activated emergency protocols, prepared to respond if Kovac's organization attempted forced acquisition. Her professional cover provided a perfect explanation for late-night activity while establishing another layer of protection. "Resources take many forms," Sarah responded, maintaining perfect efficiency while positions of tactical advantage solidified. "Some organizations measure success in profit, others in preservation." The philosophy carried weight earned through years of protecting cultural heritage from those who saw only financial value. The silver streak in her hair caught evening light as she moved between tables with practiced grace. Each silver strand marked lessons learned protecting humanity's shared heritage, understanding that true security came not from sophisticated systems but from dedicated individuals working in concert. "Your operation faces unified opposition," Heinrich stated, voice carrying quiet certainty. "Every conservator, every technician, every specialist in Vienna's cultural institutions stands ready to protect our heritage." His words carried truth that transcended tactical assessment. Community commitment outweighed individual acquisition. Through cafe windows, more evidence of their network's activation became visible. Transportation specialists implementing enhanced tracking protocols, environmental monitoring teams conducting system checks, authentication experts establishing additional verification procedures. Each element represented another obstacle to unauthorized acquisition. Opposition can be overcome, Kovacs noted, a tactical assessment suggesting confidence. No security system is impenetrable, no protocol without vulnerability. His observation encountered something beyond tactical calculation, protection based not on systems, but on shared commitment to preservation. Sarah's movements maintained perfect cover, while established positions hardened. True protection comes from dedication, she responded, authority earned through years of safeguarding cultural heritage. Something your organization fundamentally fails to understand. Each word carried absolute certainty that transcended tactical consideration. Professor Adler's academic discussion provided updates disguised as scholarly debate. Conservation teams had secured vulnerable artifacts. Authentication experts had implemented enhanced verification protocols. Security specialists had activated additional monitoring systems. Their network's response demonstrated professional coordination. Understanding takes many forms, Diana countered, the conservator's expertise evident in her assessment. Private preservation often succeeds where public institutions lack resources. Her argument encountered fundamental truth. Cultural heritage required protection that transcended institutional boundaries. Through evening shadows, Sarah observed more elements of their network activating. Museum staff implementing emergency protocols, technical specialists conducting system upgrades, preservation experts establishing enhanced monitoring. Each activity represented another layer of protection based on shared commitment. Resources without dedication serve no lasting purpose, Heinrich stated, voice carrying quiet authority. True preservation requires understanding value beyond market price. His words carried weight earned through decades of protecting Vienna's heritage from those who saw only profit potential. Maria's movements conveyed additional confirmation. Medical facilities stood ready, emergency protocols activated, response teams prepared. Her professional cover provided a perfect explanation for late-night activity while establishing another layer of protection based on community commitment. Your operation faces coordinated response, Sarah noted, maintaining tactical advantage while appearing completely routine. Every cultural institution in Vienna stands united against unauthorized acquisition. Each word carried certainty earned. Through years of protecting heritage from sophisticated threats, through antique mirrors, Kovacs' team processed tactical implications. Their surveillance assets reported increased activity throughout the museum quarter. Conservation teams implementing enhanced protocols, security specialists conducting system upgrades, preservation experts establishing additional monitoring. Coordination can be disrupted, Volkov observed, technical expertise suggesting confidence. No network maintains perfect communication, no response without vulnerability. His assessment encountered something beyond tactical calculation, protection based on shared commitment rather than sophisticated systems. The cafe's ancient radiators hissed, creating acoustic patterns that masked subtle communications. Each sound carried echoes of lessons learned, protecting cultural heritage. Understanding that true security came not from impenetrable systems, but from dedicated individuals working in concert. Your methods belong to an outdated model, Diana stated, the conservator's training evident in her assessment. Modern preservation requires adaptation to new realities. Her argument encountered fundamental truth. Protection meant ensuring cultural heritage remained accessible to future generations. Sarah's movements maintained perfect efficiency, while tactical advantage solidified. Reality is defined by choices, she responded, authority earned through years of safeguarding heritage. Some choose profit, others choose preservation. Each word carried certainty that transcended tactical consideration. Through cafe windows, more evidence of their network's activation became visible. Transportation specialists implementing enhanced protocols, environmental monitoring teams conducting system checks, authentication experts establishing additional verification procedures. Each element represented another obstacle to unauthorized acquisition. "Your operation ends tonight," Sarah stated quietly, voice carrying absolute certainty. Vienna's cultural heritage remains protected by those who understand true preservation. The resolution carried weight, earned through years of dedication, community commitment that no tactical operation could overcome. The confrontation at Café Mozart concluded not with violence, but with transformation. Kovac's organization encountered something beyond sophisticated security, a network of dedicated individuals united in protecting cultural heritage for future generations. Their operation faced not just enhanced protocols, but fundamental understanding that true preservation required commitment beyond profit. Kovac's expression shifted, a flicker of understanding crossing his scarred face. He had anticipated resistance, even expected opposition, but this was something different. This was not just a defense, it was a declaration, a message that Vienna's heritage was not for sale, not to be hoarded in private collections or exchanged in secret deals. It belonged to history, to the people, to time itself. Sarah stood unwavering, the weight of past losses tempered by the iron certainty of her mission. The silver in her hair caught the dim glow of the cafe's vintage lamps as she regarded Kovac with something between pity and resolve. "You could walk away," she said, her voice even. "A man of your experience must recognize when a battle is already lost." Kovac exhaled slowly, fingers drumming lightly on the table's surface. Around him, his operatives remained still, waiting for his signal, but they too had begun to understand. Their carefully laid plans had been unraveled, not by force, but by the will of a city that refused to surrender its past. Professor Adler leaned forward, his tone almost academic, but laced with steel. "There is a lesson to be learned here. True preservation is a communal effort. When history is safeguarded by the many, it becomes indestructible." Heinrich nodded, folding his arms across his chest. "You are not the first to think otherwise. You will not be the last. But let me assure you, every time someone tries to take what does not belong to them, they find that Vienna stands in their way." A slow, knowing smile touched Maria's lips. She had seen men like Kovac before, calculating, pragmatic, and she knew the moment his mind reached the inevitable conclusion. "There are other places," Kovac finally said, voice quiet. "Other opportunities." "Perhaps," Sarah agreed, tilting her head slightly. "But not here." A long silence stretched between them before Kovac finally rose, his team following suit in a choreographed motion. He adjusted his coat, nodded once in silent acknowledgement, and turned for the door. As he and his operatives disappeared into the Vienna night, the tension in the cafe eased, though the weight of the moment remained. Sarah exhaled, exchanging glances with her allies. The battle had ended without a single shot fired, yet it had been won decisively. Heinrich moved to the bar, pouring a round of drinks with the precision of a man who had done so in times of both celebration and sorrow. He slid a glass toward Sarah, lifting his own in quiet salute. "To the past," he said. Sarah lifted her glass, meeting the eyes of each person in the room. "And to the future." Outside, the city's historic lights burned brightly, illuminating Vienna's heritage, protected not by walls or locks, but by those who understood that some treasures were meant to be shared, never owned. In the weeks that followed, Sarah and her network expanded their efforts. The museum quarter saw reinforced security, not just in guards and cameras, but in the vigilance of those who understood that preservation required people, not just protocols. Restorers and conservators from across Europe collaborated in new, Initiatives, sharing techniques, fortifying archives, and ensuring that no artifact fell into the wrong hands. Public awareness campaigns flourished, turning citizens into guardians of their own history. The battle for preservation was not waged in a single night. It was a lifelong commitment, carried forward by those who understood its importance. Sarah often returned to Café Mozart, drawn by the rhythm of the city and the quiet knowledge that their unseen war continued. Some nights she found herself replaying Dr. Rothschild's final words, the lessons he had passed on before his life was taken. He had believed that history's true defenders were not just scholars or curators, but all who chose to remember, to protect, to fight for the right of future generations to see and learn from the past. One evening, as she traced the rim of her glass in thought, a voice pulled her from her reverie. "I've heard about what you do." Sarah looked up. A young historian stood before her, his eyes alight with curiosity and determination. He was young, perhaps too young to fully understand what he was asking, but there was something familiar in his expression, a quiet resolve that echoed her own at the beginning of her journey. She gestured to the seat across from her. "It starts with understanding," she said, "and then it's about deciding where you stand." As he sat, the cafe's ancient clock chimed softly in the background, marking the hour. Outside, Vienna's lights burned against the night, illuminating streets steeped in history. The city remained vigilant, standing guard over the echoes of its past, and within its winding alleys, its grand museums and quiet cafes, the quiet work of preservation continued, passed from one guardian to the next, ensuring that history would never be forgotten. This version reinforces the cyclical nature of the fight for preservation, hinting that Sarah's journey is not the end, but the continuation of something larger. Let me know if you'd like any further refinements. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe. And turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.